Monster Hunter World Iceborne's endgame can be a challenge for the best of hunters out there, but with the right weapons and builds, even endgame tasks can be easily achieved. I'm Darcblade, and we're back with even more amazing builds for Monster Hunter World Iceborne. In this episode we're going to be looking at endgame builds for the Chargeblade. The Chargeblade of course is a Swiss army knife when it comes to mechanics. Whilst in its sword and shield form it has more defensive options, but the weapon can transform into its axe mode to make use of a more DPS orientated playstyle. This is enhanced even further thanks to the Savage Axe mode, but if that's not your thing, you can of course still play the weapon mainly in sword and shield form, powering up the weapon and then going for that super amped elemental discharge. Now the builds I've used for endgame activities in Monster Hunter World are a mixed bag, just to show how versatile the weapon actually is. But a disclaimer for this series though, these builds are aimed for endgame hunters, having completed the story and having access to all armors and weapons the game has to offer. A large jewel collection is also advisable, but you can always swap out jewels here and there if you do not have what is shown off in these videos. So the first build I use is the artillery build. This is a fairly strong build whose main focus is spamming super amped elemental discharge and having the fire bursts from that attack deal as much damage as possible. As a result, this uses the Zora Magdaros set bonus, which allows us to increase the artillery skill, which increases the damage of our files from level 3 up till level 5. On top of that, this build also has a few decent quality of life skills, and is perfect for anyone who's not a fan of the new clutch claw mechanics. So for this build you'll need the Zora Headgear Beta, Damascus Mail Beta, Zora Claws Beta, Damascus Coil Beta, Zora Spurs Beta, and I'm also using a Handicraft Charm 4. As for my weapon, I'm using the REGEN Beastal Blade Ikazuchi that has a health regen augmentation and an affinity increase augmentation attached to it. You could have gone with an attack increase augmentation instead of the affinity increase, as file bursts, which is the main focus behind this build, don't crit. But nonetheless I wanted to remove the negative affinity on the REGEN Chargeblade. Alternatively, you could replace this and use the Melting Grasp, which is the Acidic Glavenus Chargeblade, which is a nice alternative. It also allows you to maybe go with the non-elemental route. Now despite the REGEN Chargeblade having a thunder rating, this is not the main reason for using this weapon. The main reason is the high raw attack that this weapon comes with. But anyway, moving on to the jewels. Now of course, like I said, depending on the jewels you have available in your collection, you may have to replace some here and there, but the main jewels I've gone for are artillery jewels to increase that artillery skill. I've then gone for a sharp jewel for that protective polish. This is especially needed if you do decide to go with the Acidic Glavenus Chargeblade. I've then gone for guardian and attack jewels to increase both our attack boost as well as max out the offensive guard skill. I've then gone for a magazine jewel for capacity boost, vitality jewels for that health boost, a shield jewel for that guard up skill, and finally a phoenix jewel to provide us a point in the coalescence skill. Alternatively, like I said, if you are using the Melting Grasp, the Acidic Glavenus weapon, replace this with a non-elemental boost jewel. As for the jewels in your mantles, these are really down to personal preference. I've gone for defensive jewels here. So if you've done what I've done here, you should have a build with 150 health, 100 stamina, which would be 200 health and 150 stamina when you're on a hunt and taking all your relevant consumables. You have an attack of 1213 with a decent chunk of white sharpness. You have no affinity, but this isn't important as the build is relying on file bursts to deal the damage. You have 90 thunder rating with impact files, and as for your defense, you have a very high base defense with 917 that is exceedingly strong against fire, but unfortunately weak to the other elements. As for the skills, you have artillery at level 5. Artillery increases the damage of our files when we attack with the Chargeblade. You have attack boost level 4. Attack boost level 4 increases our raw damage of this build, and at level 4 it also provides us a bonus 5% affinity. You have handicraft level 4, increasing the sharpness of our weapon. Health boost level 3, increasing our maximum health to that potential 200. Focus level 3. Focus is very useful for the Chargeblade as it allows us to charge up our files more quickly when we're attacking. You have flinch free at level 3. This is a byproduct of the gear we're wearing, but can still be useful. It prevents all knockbacks and trip attacks on our hunter. You have offensive guard level 3. Offensive guard is one of the skills you need to utilize for this build to work effectively. Basically, when you perfectly time a block, it will increase the raw damage of this build, ultimately increasing our file damage. And with offensive guard easily being obtainable with the Chargeblade, the goal is to block the incoming attack, activate the buff, and then immediately go into your guard reaction, performing that super amped elemental discharge and getting maximum damage that way. Anyway, you'll also have earplugs level 1. This is a byproduct of the gear but helps resist minor roars. You have capacity boost level 1, increasing our maximum files from 5 to 6. You have guard level 1, increasing our block potential and reducing the stamina used when blocking attacks. You only really need to get guard to level 1 as a charged up shield. It will also increase how effective our guard is with this build. You have guard up level 1, allowing us to block unblockable attacks. Protective polish level 1, allowing us to put a protective coating over our sharpness gauge, preventing any sharpness loss for a small duration. And you'll have coalescence level 1. Coalescence is a underrated buff that when you remove a blight from your hunter, it increases your raw attack, elemental damage and ailment damage. And as blights are quite prevalent in Monster Hunter World Iceborne, this skill is actually quite useful. You also have defense boost and divine blessing when wearing your mantles, improving our overall defense. Finally, you'll have the Zora Magdaros Essence artillery secret, allowing us to get that artillery skill up from level 3 to a maximum of level 5. So there you have it. As you can see, it is a pretty straightforward build utilizing the super amped elemental discharge as your main source of damage output. It also comes with a few decent quality of life and defensive skills thanks to guard up and flinch free. But the main pros and cons behind this build is that it has high file damage, you don't have to rely on tenderizing a monster to get the most out of it, and it also works against any monsters despite the weapon being a thunder weapon. This is because, as I said, the file damage from our impact files do fixed damage based on the artillery skill and a few other aspects, so you don't have to worry about affinity or monsters' elemental weaknesses. On the downside, this build does have low affinity, so using the Savage Axe mode and our normal sword attacks won't be doing exactly a lot of damage, and unfortunately to get the most out of this build you have to rely on timing. Blocking a monster's attack, activating that offensive guard, and then going into your super amped elemental discharge is key for this build to work. And of course during that time the monster could move, so like I said, you have to read a monster and attack at the right moment. But nonetheless, this is a very strong build, and I would highly recommend it to any Darcblade fan out there. But anyway, let's move on to the next build, which is a true critical element build. This build utilizes the true critical element skill found on the Silver Rathalos armor set. As a result, it is a high affinity build that relies on elemental damage. So for this build I'm using the Golden Headdress Beta, the Silver Soul Mail Beta, Silver Soul Braces Beta, Silver Soul Coil Beta, and the Silver Soul Greaves Beta. I'm also using a Wormbane's Charm 5, although this can be replaced with whatever element you want to use. And for my weapon I'm using Grudge, which is the Ebony Odogaron Charge Blade. Now this Charge Blade isn't necessarily the best, especially when it comes to elemental damage, but there are various reasons for me using it. One, the weapon already comes with high affinity, and two, the weapon doesn't actually need any more handicraft added to this build for it to work. Lastly, I also love the way the weapon looks, but it can be easily replaced to suit whatever element you want to use. But as for the augmentations, I've gone for, again, health regen, affinity increase, and of course elemental damage increase. So anyway, as for the jewels, there are a few main ones you want to go for here. Firstly, I've gone for a dragon jewel, although this will be replaced with whatever element you are using. This will max out the level of whatever element the weapon you are using is, so this maxes out our dragon attack. I've then gone for magazine jewels for that capacity boost, charger and vitality jewels to both increase the focus skill to maximum as well as the health boost. I've then gone for expert jewels to increase our affinity, and finally one of these came with a byproduct of an iron war jewel to give us a point in that guard skill again. As for the mantle jewels, these are down to personal preference. Again, I've gone for defensive based ones. So if you don't know what I've done here, you should have a build with 150 health, 100 stamina, which will be 200 health and 150 stamina when you're on a hunt. You have an attack of 918 with full white sharpness. You have 65% base affinity, which will be 100% affinity easily, especially if you go for monster weak points and those weak points have been tenderized first. You'll also have 570 dragon rating with high elder seal, and you'll have power element files. As for the defense, you'll have a fairly strong base defense with 941, that is strong against fire and dragon, but unfortunately weak to the other three elements. As for the skills, you'll have dragon attack level 6, increasing the dragon rating and damage of this build. Of course, if you're using a different weapon and thus a different charm, this will be replaced with thunder attack, water attack, whatever. You have critical eye at level 5, increasing our affinity by a base percentage. You have slinger capacity level 5, this is a byproduct of the gear we're wearing but allows us to carry more slinger ammunition into battle. You have health boost level 3, critical boost level 3, increasing the damage of the raw portion of our attack when we crit a monster. So basically the base portion, the attack portion of our weapon's damage is increased, not the elemental portion. You have Weakness Exploit level 3, increasing our affinity by a set percentage when we're attacking monster weak points, and should these weak points be tenderized first, this affinity increase is increased even more. We have Focus level 3, Windproof level 1, a byproduct of the gear but helps resist wind effects slightly. You have Capacity Boost level 1, Guard level 1, and of course you'll have the Defense Boost and Divine Blessing defensive mantle skills. As for the set bonus, you'll have Silver Rathalos Essence, Slinger Ammo Secret, allowing us to get that Slinger capacity skill up from level 3 to level 5, and you'll also have True Critical Element, which is by far the most important set bonus on this build, allowing the elemental portion of our damage to be increased when we crit a monster. So think of it like crit boost but for the elemental portion of our attacks. So there you have it. As you can see, it is a strong elemental build, but relies on affinity more than anything else. Now the pros and cons for this build is obviously its high elemental damage, of course it has high affinity, and that is without even tenderizing monster body parts first. But be aware though, if you do switch out the weapon you're using, your affinity may drop, as the Ebony Dogoran weapon, Grudge, comes with one of the highest affinity ratings there is. But on top of that, this build works with pretty much any charge blade, just so long as it's a power element file charge blade. Just remember to swap out the charm as well as the one remaining elemental jewel to match the element of whatever weapon you are using. But of course there are some downsides. The build does rely on you tenderizing a monster first, especially if you are using a lower affinity weapon, and unfortunately there is no handicraft on this build, so if you're using a weapon that requires handicraft to get to purple sharpness, you're going to be a little bit out of luck. You may have to swap around a few jewels here and there in order to obtain that purple sharpness you desire, and as a result you may miss out on some other skills. But regardless, if you're able to get a weapon that doesn't really need handicraft, then this is a strong affinity elemental build. Just be sure to take into account a monster's elemental weaknesses before using it. But anyway, let's move on to the next build, which is the True Element Acceleration build. This build makes use of a unique skill added to Monster Hunter World Iceborne, known as True Element Acceleration, found on the Namiel set, increasing the elemental rating of a build so long as we're continuously attacking a monster. So again, this is going to be a strong elemental build, but instead of focusing on high affinity, this build will be similar to the first one and instead focus on spamming that super amped elemental discharge. So for this build you need the Golden Loon Helm beta, the Tentacle Cloak beta, Tentacle Gloves beta, Tentacle Coil beta, and the Tentacle Greaves beta. I'm also using a Frost Charm 5, of course replace this to match whatever element you are using if need be, and for my weapon I'm using the Deep Snegel 2. Which is the Beartodus charge blade. This of course comes with a health regen augmentation as well as elemental increase augmentations. As for your jewels, you've got a few to play around with here. Firstly, I've gone for a magazine jewel for that capacity boost. I've then gone for charger jewels, one of which had a byproduct of a vitality jewel attached to it. This increases both our focus skill as well as our health boost skill. I've then gone for a frost jewel to max out the frost attack, of course replace this if need be to match whatever element you are using. I've then gone for an iron war jewel for a point in the guard skill. I've then gone for a sharp jewel to provide us that protective polish, a hard enduring jewel to max out the item prolonger skill. This works in conjunction with the sharp jewel. I've then had a few other jewels to play around with, to which I've gone for enhancer protection jewels to both increase the divine protection skill as well as max out the power prolonger skill, which left me with one jewel to play around with, to which I've added a fortitude jewel. Now when it comes to the mantles, again I've gone for defensive based jewels, but instead of using divine protection this time I've gone for resistor jewels to max out the blight resistance skill. So if you've done what I've done here, you should have a build with 150 health, 100 stamina, which will again be 200 health and 150 stamina when you're on a hunt and taking all your relevant consumables. You have an attack of 958 with a decent chunk of white sharpness. You have no affinity with an elemental rating of 880 with power element files. As for your defense, you have a decent base defense rating with 915 that is strong against water and thunder, neutral against ice, but unfortunately weak to the other two elements. As for the skills, you have Ice Attack level 6, increasing the ice rating and damage of this build. Of course, this will be replaced to whatever charm and weapon you are using if need be. You have Health Boost level 3, Focus level 3, Power Prolonger level 3, allowing our Charge Blade to stay charged for longer periods. You have Stamina Surge level 3. This is a byproduct of the gear, but is useful in a way. It allows us to recharge our stamina at a quicker rate, useful when we're on the defensive and blocking attacks. You have Item Prolonger level 1, allowing item buffs and that to remain active for longer periods. This works well in conjunction with Protected Polish. You have Divine Blessing level 3, giving us a chance at receiving reduced damage when we take a hit. You have Tool Specialist level 3, which again is another byproduct of the gear we're wearing. This allows our specialist tools to come off cooldown quicker. You have Blight Resistance level 1, although here it could be potentially level 3. Blight Resistance allows us to resist certain elemental and ailment blights. You have Fortify level 1, this is a byproduct of our jewels. Fortify basically increases our attack and defense if we should die on a hunt. You have Capacity Boost level 1, Constitution level 1, again a byproduct of the gear. Constitution basically reduces the stamina cost of certain moves such as dodging. You have Guard level 1, Protective Polish level 1, and that defense boost on our mantles. You'll also have the Namiel's Divinity set bonus, Elemental Acceleration, and True Elemental Acceleration. True Elemental Acceleration is what we're going for with this build. Basically, when we're constantly attacking a monster, a buff will kick in that increases our overall elemental rating, allowing us to deal more elemental damage. So there we have it. As you can see, this build is strong when it comes to elemental damage, but like I said, it doesn't really work like the previous build in that it doesn't rely on you critting a monster. Instead, you'll be focusing on spamming that super amped elemental discharge to get the most damage out of this build. This is because, like with the first build, the artillery build, the files, the elemental files won't crit, but instead by increasing the actual elemental damage, we can cause these files to still dish out a decent amount of DPS against monsters. But of course there are pros and cons to every build. Of course, like I just discussed, the biggest pro with this build is its high elemental file damage. It also works with any element, so long as you switch out the weapon and charm to match whatever element of the weapon you are using. And it also means that you don't have to worry about tenderizing monster body parts, so another build to consider if you don't like the Clutch Claw. But of course every build does have its downsides. This build of course has very low affinity, so you're not going to be critting much with it, and on top of that the build doesn't have any handicraft. So it kind of needs weapons that don't really need handicraft to work effectively. But that being said, you can always swap out the power prolonger jewels if you so wish for handicraft jewels if you're using a power elemental file weapon that can potentially get to purple sharpness. But anyway, let's move on to the next build, which is the health regen build. Now the idea behind this build was pure defense, mainly focusing on health regen, being able to naturally regen our health thanks to the Valhasak set bonus, while at the same time being able to recover our health by attacking a monster thanks to both the Nergigante set bonus as well as the health regen augmentation. So for this build you'll need the Golden Loon Helm beta, the Fell Shroud Mail beta, Fell Shroud Braces beta, the Ruinous Coil beta, and the Ruinous Greaves beta. I'm also using a Challenger Charm 4, and for my weapon I'm using the Lunar Eostray, which is the Golden Rathian Charge Blade. Of course, when it comes to augmentations, I've purely gone for health regen augmentations. Now, as for the jewels, you've got a decent amount of jewels to play around with here. Firstly, I've gone for artillery jewels for that artillery skill. I've then gone for a magazine jewel for the capacity boost skill. I've then gone for charger jewels to max out the focus skill. Earplug jewels to max out the earplug skill. Some of these came with byproducts in the form of vitality jewels to max out the health boost skill, and a medicine jewel to increase the recovery up skill, which left me with a few to play around with, to which I've gone for a challenger protection jewel to give us a maximum agitator skill as well as a point in divine blessing. I've then gone for an iron wall jewel, of course for the guard skill, and finally I've gone for some attack jewels for some attack boost and a fortitude jewel for that fortify skill. As for the mantles, of course I've gone for the defensive route again by going for hard defense and protection jewels. So if you've done what I've done here, you should have a build with 150 health, 100 stamina, which again will be 200 health and 150 stamina when you're on hunt and taking all your relevant consumables. You'll have an attack of 1141 with a decent chunk of white sharpness. You'll have 15% affinity with a poison rating of 420. You have impact files, and when it comes to your defense, you'll have a high base defense of 941. That is strong against water, ice and fire, but unfortunately weak to thunder and dragon. As for the skills, you've got a lot of skills with this build. First of all is earplugs at level 5. Earplugs basically allows you to ignore all monster rules, preventing any loss of your character when you're on a hunt. This can potentially leave a monster open to attack or allow you to retreat and heal. You have agitator level 5. Agitator is a wonderful skill in Iceborne. When a monster becomes enraged, it increases both our raw attack as well as our affinity. This works well in conjunction with your Clutch Claw. When a monster isn't enraged, the Clutch Claw, especially the flint shot, will work on a monster, so you can spend time using those attacks. And when the monster becomes enraged, Agitator activates, to which you go back into your normal combo rotations with your Charge Blade. You have attack boost level 4, health boost level 3, recovery up level 3. Recovery up increases how much healing we receive through healing methods and effects such as potions or other mechanics. You have recovery speed level 3, which increases how quickly our health regenerates naturally over time. Normally this is only for the red portion of our health bar, but thanks to the Val set bonus, this can pretty much be the entirety of our health bar. You have focus level 3, artillery level 3, dragon attack level 1. This is a byproduct of the gear, it's not needed on this build whatsoever, unless you want to swap out the gold Rathian charge blade for a dragon charge blade. You have fortify level 1, capacity boost level 1, guard level 1, and divine blessing level 1, which will be level 3 if you're wearing your mantle. As for the set bonuses, you'll have the Val Soul Vein super recovery, allowing our health bar to regenerate over time past the red portion of our health bar. So basically our entire health bar regenerates naturally over time. You also have Nergigante's Ambition, Hasten Recovery, allowing us to recover our health when we're attacking a monster, and this does work in conjunction with the health regen augmentation on our weapon. So as you can see, it is a very strong defensive build with a lot of health recovery and survivability that way. And of course it comes with a lot of pros and cons. The main pro for this weapon is its high survivability. Being able to keep yourself alive during a hunt thanks to all these health regen mechanics makes this an easy build to use when it comes to taking on harder tasks. It also comes with great quality of life skills, including the earplug skills, that whilst may not be meta or essential, can definitely make hunts feel a little bit easier. And of course the last pro with this build is that you don't always have to stop and heal. You can continue your assault, and thanks to the health regen mechanics, it means that you don't have to sheath your weapon and drink a potion. You can just keep on attacking a monster, preventing any loss in DPS that way. But unfortunately there are some cons. On the whole, this build does have lower DPS than some of the other builds featured in this video, unfortunately. The main damage source will be coming from your files with the artillery skill. And on top of that, it also is another build that doesn't really have any handicraft. Now you could drop a little bit of DPS even further if you wanted to by dropping the agitator skill in favour for the handicraft charm if there was a weapon you wanted to use that could get to purple sharpness, but as always with Monster Hunter World, the choice is up to you. Nonetheless, this is a build I go to when I'm testing the water with new monsters and tough hunts. But anyway, let's move on to our fifth and final build, which is the Guiding Lands farming build. This is a bit of a jack of all trades build that you can take into the Guiding Lands to farm most monsters. So for this you'll need the Kaiser Crown Beta, the Damascus Mail Beta, the Kaiser Vambraces Beta, the Kaiser Coil Beta, and the Garuga Greaves Beta. I'm also using a Handicraft Charm 4, and for my weapon I'm using the Soulfire brand Ruin. This has a health regen augmentation attached to it as well as an affinity increase augmentation. As for the jewels, you've got a fair few to play around with here. First of all, I've gone for artillery jewels for that artillery skill, magazine jewel for capacity boost, destroyer and vitality jewels to both increase the part breaker skill to maximum as well as our health boost. I've then gone for charger jewels for that focus skill, tenderizer jewels for some weakness exploit, expert jewels for some critical eye, an iron wall jewel for the guard skill, a handicraft jewel, and finally a geology jewel for the geology skill. This I'll talk about in a minute. Now, one jewel that is missing from this build, which I would strongly advise putting into it if you can, maybe you can drop the handicraft jewel in favour of it, which would be a fortified jewel. As in the Guiding Lands, this skill can be incredibly useful. But anyway, if you've done what I've done here, you should have a build with 150 health, 100 stamina, which will be 200 health and 150 stamina when you're on a hunt and taking all your relevant consumables. You have an attack of 1026 with purple sharpness. You have 50% affinity, which will be 100% so long as you're attacking monster weak points and those weak points have been tenderized first. You have a blast rating of 180 with impact files. And as for your defense, you have a decent base defense with 907 that is strong against fire, thunder and dragon, but unfortunately weak to water and ice. As for the skills, you have critical eye level 7, handicraft level 5, health boost level 3, weakness exploit level 3, focus level 3, part breaker level 3. Part breaker is a wonderful skill to use in the Guiding Land as it's all about breaking parts off a monster's bodies. Part breaker allows us to achieve this more easily, which ultimately leads to more loot in the Guiding Lands. You have artillery level 3, blast attack level 3, although it can potentially get to level 4 with our mantles here. Blast attack increases the blast rating and build up of this build. You have heat guard level 1, this is a byproduct of the gear but prevents any damage when you're in hot areas such as the lava zone or the Elder's Recess. You have latent power level 1, a byproduct of the gear but could be considered useful. Latent power is a buff that kicks in after you've been fighting a monster for a set amount of time, increasing our affinity and reducing our stamina depletion. you have Capacity Boost level 1, Guard level 1, Geologist level 1. Geologist is a skill that is a must-have skill for the Guiding Lands. I don't know if it's a bug officially or not, but when you're using a point in the Geologist skill and you're taking on the harder monsters in the Guiding Lands, it means that you can loot the monster body parts that drop off of them twice instead of just once. And finally, you'll have Haste and Recovery level 1, which is the Nergigante set bonus, allowing us to recover our health when we're attacking a monster, and this does work in conjunction with the health regen augmentation. Finally, you have the Teastra's Technique set bonus, Master's Touch, preventing any sharpness loss on our weapon when we crit a monster, so it should allow us to keep that purple sharpness for a little while longer. So there you have it. As you can see, it is pretty much a jack of all trades build, an all-rounder build, able to take on most monsters in the Guiding Lands. Whether it be through your normal attacks in the high affinity or your files and the increased damage thanks to artillery, you shouldn't have too much of a hard time. Just remember to stop and loot as you break off monster body parts. But as for the pros and cons, of course, like I said, it is an all-round build, so you don't have to really take into account a monster's elemental or element weaknesses. On top of that, this build also has high handicraft, so you can swap out the weapon if you want to for something else. Just remember, if you do so, you'll be dropping some fairly large dual sockets as well as the Haste and Recovery health regen buff. And of course, this build is a high affinity build, so it does have decent damage output. But on the downsides, there's only really one con here, and that is, unfortunately, if you do decide to go a more defensive route with this by blocking most monster attacks, it means that it will eat through your purple sharpness relatively quickly, which will lower our overall DPS. Now, one way to counter this would be to use a sharp jewel, but unfortunately we had limited jewels to play around with. But nonetheless, this build is one I use regularly when farming the Guiding Lands. So there we have it. Those are endgame builds that I use for the Charge Blade in Monster Hunter World Iceborne. Now, of course, there are more endgame builds to come, especially with the introduction of Safi'Jiiva. And as I always say, you don't have to use what is shown in these videos. Use what you want to use, as most tasks in Monster Hunter World Iceborne can be taken on with any weapon or gear set. But anyway, I hope you found this video helpful or informative, and until next time, I've been Darcblade, bringing you endgame builds for the Charge Blade in Monster Hunter World Iceborne. Hope you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching, subscribe and like for more.